Well, it is all over the news. The monsters in charge of the Islamic Republic of Iran have been very sad lately. They've been organizing funerals for the chief terrorists killed by the IDF in the strikes last week. But don't worry, those tireless rascals have found a way to cheer themselves up, doing the thing they do best by cracking down on dissenters within Iran itself. Under the novel excuse of collaborating with Israeli forces, they've been jailing, torturing, and killing up to 700 people in the last few days. And of course, the purge has been helped by the US, Israeli, and Western governments' lack of cojones, who decided to hand over victory and give Ali Khamenei and his band of criminals another chance to build a nuke.
Welcome to the Daily Objective, and we're joined today by James and Anders. Welcome, guys. Thank you very much for joining us. Let me start with you, James. I heard from the Fars news agency, the one that's affiliated with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, with this quote, that the Israeli spy network has become highly active inside the country. So they're on top of their intelligence, aren't they? Apparently, the Israelis have boots on the ground since as far back as 2010 within Iran, and certainly, obviously, having friends within the Iranians working for them, and obviously that's evidenced by the success in this 12-day war. But how do we interpret? Do you think, James? So what's going on in Iran now that there's been this ceasefire and the Iranian dictatorship is still occupying the rulership of the country?
Well, as you say, it's obvious that Mossad and Israeli intelligence has done such a magnificent job. Obviously, they've got intelligence operatives in Iran, but I find it hard to believe that suddenly Iran has gotten so much better so quickly at detecting them and finding just exactly who those are. That would be extraordinary. That wouldn't it? Would it be absolutely extraordinary if they were operatives and they did know about this? Why didn't they do this, 2 weeks ago, a fortnight ago, to get all these people? So, of course, like many observers, I have to believe that what they're doing is taking this as an excuse to crack down on domestic dissent. They are the regime. What has changed in the last fortnight, of course, is the security of the regime. The Ayatollah has been hiding in a bunker until just recently. Their regime this is a confession, I think, on their part of how the regime itself has been weakened, dramatically weakened. And so they're taking this as an opportunity to crack down on dissenters, whether or not they have anything to do with Israeli intelligence. That is the most logical inference, obviously, and the most probable truth here. And yes, the really grisly thing about this is that Mr. Trump, with his ceasefire and his talk of peace and negotiation over a new Iranian nuclear program, has ensured this evil regime's continuation. He is the one who threw them a lifeline. He is the one who really has made this possible. I will make a distinction between the people in Iran, the government, who are actually killing the dissenters and arresting them in the hundreds now, and killing some. They are the killers. But on the other hand, Mr. Trump has made this possible. He threw a lifeline to the regime. He allowed this to take place, in effect. It is, of course, primarily because of their threat to America, Israel, and the West generally, that we ought to seek regime change. But he has also betrayed the Iranian people who've been oppressed for so long, for most of my life. People will be killed in the streets and arrested. This is not the first time the Iranians have done that. And I'm ashamed to admit that my government has never once lifted a finger when it looked like the Iranian people were trying to throw off that yoke and go for something better.
Well, if you think you got it bad, our government still hasn't decided whether they were behind the US for the strikes or not. So, it gets worse. Anders, because before I come to you for your opening thoughts, I'd like to remind people that the Iranian is the same regime that was actually on the UN Committee for Human Rights last year. So, that's the kind of people we're facing. So What do you think about this shocking news that Iran is cracking down on freedom?
Well, I basically agree with what James just said. Just a couple of points. I mean, we can obviously not trust any information coming out of Iran, but it's more likely, as James said, that these are internal dissidents that they are cracking down on. And you would hope that Israel had some plans for either getting their cooperators out of the country, or that they are so deeply embedded that they won't find them. Secondly, with the risk of sounding like Cato the Elder here, Carthage must be destroyed. I don't advocate for destroying Tehran or Iran, but I mean, regime change is the only outcome of this entire situation that would allow us to declare victory. Because it's not just that Trump, as James said, has once again, through his fickleness or unpredictability or whatever it is that guides him, has betrayed the Iranian people. But it's also in the U.S.'s self-interest to get rid of this regime. I mean, this is an objectively factual enemy of the United States, not only Israel. And before that regime is gone, this war has not been won.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Anders. And just to be clear, so far as we know, they've executed, I think, 6 so far. Or at least that's what they've announced officially, and that included 3 Kurds right at the beginning, right after the war finished, who were actually captured back in 2023 and were accused of smuggling assassination tools into Iran back in 2023. But they decided, obviously, for PR purposes, to do the executions now to make it look as if they'd just been, caught now, and the Iranians are retaking their grip of the country after being so humiliated by Israel in the course of this 12-day war. I think, obviously, the Iranian dictatorship uses all sorts of techniques which we're familiar with all dictatorships, things like forced confessions, things like fake information, unfair trials. They've been using these so-called death commissions, which is pretty clear from the name what they're involved, what they're after, and of course the mass executions and the repression of their people, what the BBC calls hardcore repression, as opposed to the light version, which happens maybe here. What do you think, James, of the ways in which this has opened up a PR window for Iran to do what dictatorships do in the first place, and therefore to ensure that the fear factor is used to full effect over the Iranian people at this point in time?
Well, precisely, that's what it has done. It's opened up an opportunity for them to oppress their own people. I mean, I have a hard time believing that hundreds are really involved in Israeli or American intelligence here. That's absurd on the face of it. And so they will take this opportunity to crack down on all opposition. And these are the people, Mr. Trump, that you're trusting with a deal. You really think that that these monsters can credibly be dealt with, that you can strike a peace deal with them about energy, creating a nuclear program? No, it's the same exact distrust that he once expressed about Mr. Obama's deals with Iran, which they, of course, continuously break. You cannot sanction evil in this way. First, the long-term consequences are going to be death and destruction, but you can't even trust them, Mr. Trump. How do you think you can possibly trust them? But is this an excuse to crack down? Oh, yes. Kurds, Kurds are likely to be the ones involved in Mossad. Whoa, Kurds too have been arrested a couple of years back. Right. No, it's obvious everything that comes out of the Iranian regime's mouth is a lie about this. They'll put it out for media consumption, obviously. But also obvious to me is that this is much bigger than any kind of intelligence crackdown. This is going after the opposition because the regime has been dramatically weakened. And rather than take advantage, as Anders says, of this weakness is Israel has created this opportunity, and here we're not taking advantage of that. To at least take out the rest of their military, to take out the leadership, to give the poor Iranian people a chance for something better. Because if something better did happen, America's self-interest would be dramatically enhanced. But no, patently, it's an excuse by the Iranian government to crack down on opposition. But think of what the world would be like. Think of, Iran supplies Russia with weapons. Iran is, their major customer for oil is China. And they're the major sponsors of terrorism around the world. They chant death to America. They chant death to Israel. They have a ballistic missile program. They are, as Anders says, clearly a threat to the United States, perhaps a more dangerous threat to the United States than Russia is. Why on earth is Mr. Trump doing this? Why on earth is he turning his back on American clear self-interest? And of course, there really is no conflict of interest between rational and civilized people, as Ayn Rand says. His betrayal of American interests is a betrayal also of the Iranian people, simultaneously, and for the same reason, basically. Only the Iranian people are the ones who are going to get killed first.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned there doing a deal with these people wouldn't work. Well, we know why, don't we? Ayn Rand explained it quite openly in a number of ways. Ultimately, if you accept their premises, if you sit down at the table and deal with these kind of people, you will have to accept their terms, i.e., the world you end up building is the world dictated by their terms, not yours. Because in the end, if you compromise on what we know could be a peaceful, prosperous, and happy world, you just end up something which is not as prosperous, not as happy, and certainly not free. So we know why compromising with evil is wrong. But Anders, how many times have we seen this happening? And by the way, doesn't this have some sort of harping back to what happened in Afghanistan with the withdrawal of the US forces, when your supporters, the people that were fighting on your side, were left behind to be effectively murdered by another Islamic regime, the Taliban? What do you think the West should really do in order to avoid this perpetration of support of totalitarianism all over the place?
Well, number one, yes, it does hark back to the retreat from Afghanistan, but that was a country that we shouldn't have been in the first place, because back after 9/11, when the Republican Bush administration were not willing to face the fact that it was Islamic fundamentalism that had caused all of that, and they were looking for excuses and instead took this path to nation building by invading first Iraq and then Afghanistan, and we know that both of those adventures turned into real disasters with high cost to American lives and obviously to a lot of money wasted in general. You can see this is a pattern that goes back much further back. Obviously, it has basically been a hallmark of U.S. foreign policy since World War I, or before, or just after World War I, when World War I as well, which Wilson got us involved in that we probably shouldn't have. And afterwards, when we actually saved the Soviet state by providing relief in the form of food and other things, and basically saved the red government there with dire consequences, as we all know. It took another 70 years before that regime fell. And what's the source of this? Well, it's basically a pragmatist foreign policy that is unprincipled and that does not look at America's self-interest as its primary goal. If that were the case, you would have seen a different approach to most, if not all, conflicts ever since World War I.
Yeah, for sure. And there are obviously other instances where you can obviously debate whether the US should have been involved, such as, when trying to take out Saddam Hussein in the earlier Gulf War, and of course, on the road to Baghdad, deciding to stop perhaps potentially too early, and therefore having to repeat the whole exercise some years later. But I think one of the things I notice about what's going on in the past few days in terms of the news, particularly news coming out of Iran, such as this state funeral, for example, for these 60, mixture of nuclear scientists and Iranian military leaders, they've been holding this state funeral at which they have been, in the words of the BBC, there were chanted slogans. They don't tell you what they are, but I can tell you what they are. They were death to America. They were death to Israel. The standard slogans we hear from the Iranians. In fact, the only slogans we hear, that the BBC from BBC coverage, covers, for example, the Glastonbury concert, where some stupid English punk band has been leading a "death, death, death" to the IDF slogan from the stage of Glastonbury Music Festival. So that kind of shows the warped morality that's going on, the warped sense of who to support for sure. And of course, when you see these big funerals, these big events like this, you're also seeing an Iranian regime that's in charge again, that's trying to. It was busing people in order to ensure there was good attendance for it. It's obviously leading those kind of chants and things, and also it's demonstrating that the president Peshkian was present, as was Ali Shamkhani, the right-hand guy to Ali Khamenei, who it was thought earlier on in the war had been killed by Israel, but was actually only seriously injured. But he was at this event that took place for this funeral, which is a key demonstration that he's still alive, isn't it? It's a key PR effort to prove that the Israeli attacks weren't as severe weren't as successful as they initially thought, and therefore all the time the Iranian regime is gaining extra impetus in terms of showing it's in control and that it's able to oppress its people. I just wanted to thank Bonnie for her super chat. Thank you very much, Bonnie. James, your thoughts on that?
Wow, I don't much like what I hear about the British hate speech laws, but they sure seem to be enforced in a very uneven way. If you've got a music festival chanting death to the IDF, that's not hate speech. That's not anti-Semitic. But look, I don't like suppression of free speech of any sort. But it seems to me that it's very, very one-sided in the way it's being enforced. That's one thing. And of course, Anders' review of history is brilliant. I mean, the truth is that all the way, more than 100 years ago, when America got involved in World War I, Woodrow Wilson was giving the reason, the justification as altruism, America being altruistic. You think of the Lusitania, and they don't tell you that there were Canadian troops and American arms being shipped on this passenger liner. What were we using a passenger liner to do that for anyway? But they'll use that as an excuse. But at least in those days when we fought a war in World War I, at least we marched into Berlin when the Americans got involved. There's been a decline even from that. But once you start down the premise of altruism, the current world in which we don't even fight wars properly, when we decide to fight a war. In World War II, for example, we had been attacked by the Japanese. Hitler was an international threat to the whole world, obviously. So our involvement, I think, was justified. And we fought a war properly. We fought to win. We didn't feed the enemy. We annihilated the enemy. We didn't worry about collateral damage. We understood that it was the fault of the aggressors. And then we changed their system. We changed the governments in Japan and Germany, and we were willing to occupy it as long as necessary. Today, of course, we don't fight wars properly. Well, take, as Ayn Rand pointed out about the Vietnam War, it was entirely fought for altruistic reasons. And think how many thousands of young men died for that. And then I think of Afghanistan. My God, 20 years in Afghanistan, all for altruistic reasons. We thought that, oh, well, geez, if we educate young women in Afghanistan, we will change the whole situation there. No, you for that you'd need like a occupation, as we did in West Germany or in Japan, to change the place. But no, and think over the course of 20 plus years, how many young Americans and Brits died in that war for absolutely no reason. And if that doesn't make your blood boil, I don't know what possibly could. And now here again, we think that somehow if we're nice to the Iranian, this replay now this, and it's just we're descending ever further and further down into this pit where America's self-interest, the civilization's interest, is not being considered. The real nature of aggressor nations and dictatorships is not being addressed and understood. And now we've come to the point where we're literally throwing a lifeline to the most savage regime on the planet that is perfectly happy to arrest hundreds. And in previous, just in recent years, they'll gun down people in the streets. Women will disappear in prison. And what are we thinking? What are we thinking when we think when we imagine that for 1 minute they'll be true to their word this time, or this time they won't, redevelop a nuclear program. This time they won't be aggressors. Mr. Trump will kick down the can, well, when I'm not in office, well, then I can blame it on the people who came before and the people who came after, so long as Trump gets the credit for, well, I've at least created a superficial peace while I'm president. And I really think that's all his interest is right now, to appease the anti-Semites in the American right, the peaceniks who don't understand civilization at all on the American right. I think he's doing it partially for that. But what he's doing is a shameful compromise and sanctioning of evil.
Absolutely. And you're right in pointing out that altruism is the root cause of all this. And let's remind people that with altruism, we do not mean benevolence towards other people, but exactly what the word means, otherism, putting somebody else ahead of your interests all the time, constantly, consistently, which this is exactly the reason why Ayn Rand called altruism the morality of death. Because if you play it out to its logical end, everything you have has to be given to somebody else. You got 2 kidneys, well, you're not being altruistic. You're alive, somebody else is about to die, well, you should be dead, they should be living. It's this constant of putting somebody else's perceived need and the values of somebody else's either culture or people ahead of yours. So depriving yourself, suffering yourself, taking suffering as the standard of life, which is exactly the opposite of what should be. Just look at Israel, for example. By playing out the altruistic morality, what do? They try to be liked by the by the UN, by a collection of nations that actually hate you. So you're trying to appease them. For what reason? So they can write you a nice letter, because they're not going to write you a letter. They hate you. They want you dead. So every time you say, yeah, let's go along with them, you're effectively empowering them. And what else do you want through altruism? You're just offering yourself as a sacrificial lamb. For what? For somebody else to then, take what you want. And ultimately, the problem is that the people who push this kind of hate and foster altruism are the people who have understood or believe they can take stuff by force, that can force their will on somebody else using force to effectively bypass what two normal free people would actually achieve by trade. So you have this rush for political power, because behind political power you have the force, the way to obtain what you want without actually deserving it, without producing what you need, without exchanging what you need. So that's really what motivates these kind of monsters. And that's why altruism plays so well to their book, because you've been made feel that you ought to be nice to somebody else, you ought to give up your life because it's a good thing. No, actually, once your life is gone, it's gone. So
Thank you very much to CP and Milken for your super chat. Thanks very much. We appreciate it. Very grateful for all your super chats here at Ayn Rand Centre UK. That allows us to do all this programming and all of the other in-person events which are also run, including the one coming up in Boston on the 1st of July next week. I think you were talking earlier about what boils your blood, James, but I'll come to you next, Anders. One of the things that boils my blood is seeing some of the BBC coverage of this, to be honest. I've seen Elise Doucette, the BBC, I have to call her a journalist, reporting from inside Iran. Now, it says at the bottom of her reports that she is, quote, allowed to report on condition that none of her reports are used on BBC Persian services, unquote. Now, all right, that's one aspect, but we're expected to believe that therefore everything she says that is shown on the BBC here in London is an accurate representation of the truth. That's the inference behind that statement. It may not be shown on BBC Persia, but it will be shown on the BBC in the rest of the Western world. Now, the kind of things she's been telling us in the course of her report, which she's been in a hospital, of course, talking to nurses treating some civilians, talking about to nurses saying they're the worst injuries in 32 years I've seen as a nurse, for example, or telling us that the Tehran Symphony Orchestra has been playing patriotic music in order to stir the blood of Iranians. I mean, I understand it's difficult to report from places like Iran, but to do so in this manner is surely just to to foster evil.
Yes, of course, and luckily I don't have to watch BBC, and so I don't. I don't watch, I don't get to see too many of these reports, but I mean, it's pretty consistent with what we've seen coming out of BBC since the beginning of the conflict back in October of 23. We know where BBC stands. Unfortunately, a lot of people are considering BBC one of the paragons of objectivity, but that is not the case. And how do you fight back? Well, you fight back by doing what we're doing here, by pushing back and provide commentary or provide your comments on the BBC sites. I assume that these articles and these reports, that there is a comment section. But on a deeper level, it's going back to the altruism. I mean, that's what we're fighting here. We're fighting the altruism, the anti-capitalism, and on a deeper level, even the pragmatism, because it's the pragmatism, the belief that there are no principles that unfortunately makes us repeat these things over and over and over again. Pragmatism is kind of giving a blank check to altruism, because even though we see the effects every day of the disastrous consequences of altruism, it is on a deeper level, on the epistemological level, that pragmatism is kind of enabling the continuation of altruism as it does.
Yeah.
If I may, but, one of the things we do here at Ayn Rand Center UK are seminars on Sundays that involve Leonard Peikoff's courses and speeches. Tomorrow, what we're doing is a speech that Leonard Peikoff gave in 1980, The Philosophical Basis of Capitalism, in 1980. In 1980, Dr. Peikoff was using Iran as an example, right then and there. And he's making a broader point that connects very much to what Anders says. It's not a question really of the politicians. It's not a question of the crisis of the moment. It's not a question of human nature. Capitalism's proven its success. And in this context, dictatorship has proven its evil and has proven that it is the cause of all war and oppression and all the threats to us. There's no practical information that will get through to these people. I mean, I myself will put up with, I'll watch BBC America and the news on BBC America. I do it so that you don't have to, folks. And I will read the online Guardian. Again, I don't enjoy it much, but I will do it. But it does not matter much what the practical real world effect is. Philosophy is what governs this. If you don't have a metaphysics of realism, if you don't have an epistemology of reason, if you don't have the ethics of egoism, of true properly understood selfishness, if you don't have those philosophical premises, then of course you will never get no fact, no crisis, no terrorist strike will penetrate into their minds or their souls. Then you can cite terrorist incident after terrorist incident. It will not penetrate into anyone's mind so long as the governing philosophical principles are anti-reason and anti-individualism. We have to fight this on a philosophical basis, whether it's the defense of capitalism or the defense of civilization from monstrous dictatorships like Iran. It is philosophy where the solution is. And so I'll just repeat kind of a theme that Dr. Leonard Peikoff was articulating, 45 years ago? Really, my friends, it's the work that we do here, for example, at Ayn Rand Center UK. It is the work of spreading proper philosophy and better ideas that shape how people understand a crisis, shape how people understand terrorism itself. That's where the battle lies. The battle isn't on the streets, and you can see the violence on the streets that's called free speech in my country. Now, it's not some stunt on the streets that is going to do this. It's in ideas, it's in education, it's in philosophy that our only real solution is going to come, because no crisis, no event is going to penetrate the minds all by itself. It's the way we look at it, the way we interpret it, and so long as altruism, as Anders points out, governs our thinking, there really is no real hope.
Yeah, and it's ironic that the enemies of reason have only one principle, that there are no principles. Talk about stolen concept there. But James and Anders later on, because you're in the US as well, what kind of policies do you see from either side that give us some kind of hope? Is there anything or anyone out there in the political landscape in the United States that can give us some glimmer of hope? I mean, we see for the current administration there isn't much intellectual, firepower there. But anything coming up that you can tell or hope or see, James?
Well, I don't know if it qualifies as a hope, but Trump's unpredictability and whatever he thinks waking up on any given day, I mean, I guess it's possible that it could produce some positive actions taken, but it's from such an unprincipled base that it probably won't have any long-term impact. Now, if I go to Israel, I think I heard that, or I don't know if it's a rumor or if it's concrete, that Israel has actually flagged a change in their foreign policy to a more officially more preemptive foreign policy, where they have put Iran and others on notice that we will preemptively strike again. Now, how does that jive with the ceasefire now? The ceasefire deal, which I think is I mean, it's so, I have a lack of words for it, but it's not disastrous, but it's so dishonest, and it's a betrayal of Israel and of American self-interest. And hopefully, I hope that Israel, if it sees now that that what's going on in Iran, and that Israel takes action regardless of what the United States says. That's a hope of mine. Obviously we don't know what goes on behind the scenes and such, but actually I put more right now. This can change very quickly, but right now I put more trust in that Israel does the right thing than that the US does.
Yeah. So some of what Trump has been saying has been, of course, encouraging, and some of it is the opposite. The encouraging stuff includes "you got beat to hell," said Trump, which is one aspect of it. He was asked whether he would bomb again, were it discovered that Iranians were able to enrich uranium beyond an acceptable level. And he said, without question, absolutely. So, I mean, that's a good sign, surely. I mean, James, how do we interpret what Trump has been saying up till now? And of course, the question Marco asked about whether there are any other bright lights in the US that we can hope will show us a future of some principle.
Well, like Anders, I think that Israel is a much better hope for doing something about Iran. All I can, what a sad state that we're in. That my position is, I'm hoping that these religious fanatics who run Iran are just as irrational as they've been in the past, as their words indicate that they are, and they will thumb their nose at Trump. They will insult Trump in some way. They'll take some other aggressive action that will prompt Mr. Trump once more to do something, So what I'm relying on is not the rationality of Western leaders. I'm relying on, in this sense, the super irrationality of the Iranians, because only that, it seems to me, will prompt Mr. Trump to take the appropriate action. And as he promised to do, American, in the wake of all that, of the American attack, Iranians did, although they may have done so intentionally not to kill or cause as much damage as possible, they did attack American bases in the area. Mr. Trump completely broke his word. He didn't do anything in response. To me, that does not encourage deterrence, like all these right-wing talking heads are saying. Boy, Mr. Trump has really reestablished American deterrence in the world. No, he did not. What he's doing when in talking about a ceasefire. So all I can do right now is hope that the Iranians are so irrational, and they are very, very much irrational, will do something that will offend Mr. Trump, or keep up an attack on, break the ceasefire with Israel, make another attack, block the Strait of Hormuz. Perhaps that will do something. But I'm relying more on the Ayatollah's irrationality than I am on any rationality among Western leaders. And what a sad comment that is, eh?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that irrationality you're talking about, James, is a demonstration of the fact that with these dictatorships, they're often or nearly always founded on some level of mysticism, aren't they? And even I mean, it's obviously particularly clear in the case of Iran with a theocracy. They have this term called mohareb, which is one who wages war against God, which is a crime which under Iranian law carries the death penalty. So you can accuse somebody of waging a war against God, and then you can kill them, because that is a sufficient motive to declare them their enmity against God is a crime in itself, and that justifies whatever the dictator chooses to do to them. Why is it that mysticism and dictatorships run hand in hand?
Because that's the premise. That is absolutely the premise on which all dictatorship is based. All collectivism is based. And I don't care whether it's officially atheistic communism that puts the proletariat class or the state as their idea of what God is, because that's all they're doing. They're replacing the traditional notion of a God with a mystic understanding of the collective. And well, Hitler himself, he was perhaps the most explicit about irrationality and altruism being the basis of his monstrous dictatorship. Every time, mysticism is they have to. If you had a real world orientation, you'd be in favor of freedom, capitalism, reason, material progress. And so, of course, they have to be anti-reality in a fundamental way, and thus they have to be anti-reason in a fundamental way in order to justify their power lust. And power lust is always predicated throughout history on some form of mysticism. Whereas you look at what created the United States, what created a little breathing space for the free market in the Western world during the 18th and then really in the 19th centuries, it was a respect for reason. It was the scientific revolution. Professor Bradley Thompson has a marvelous essay about the origins, the intellectual climate and the intellectual origins of the United States. I urge everyone to read it. Perhaps we can include it in the notes. But he makes this point very explicitly. It was the age of rational science and enlightenment that brought about a respect for individual rights, that brought about capitalism, that brought about the science and technology that made industrial progress possible and improve human life here on Earth. And so we know what they know. They know better than we know, these dictators, what the real basis of their dictatorship is and how to marshal people and get them to sacrifice their lives in vast numbers. It's mysticism every time. And the only antidote to that is reason, a consistent philosophical defense of rationality. And once you've done that, the other debates really don't matter, because then people will say, oh, well, look at reality. Yeah, look at reality for a minute. Do you want freedom? Do you want material progress? Or do you want what's happening in Iran today, which is simply the most consistent expression of mysticism and altruism in the world today? And they know it better than we know it.
Yeah, and regarding that, there is another essay by Ayn Rand, Faith and Force Destroy the World, which you can find here on ARCUK on the YouTube channel. There's a discussion of the essay itself with James and Alejandro, and it's an excellent one. So I suggest everyone should have a look at it because it's really, really good.
Thank you to Foster for your comment as well that you made. Although not super chat, we do sometimes read out those that aren't super chats. Foster made the point that Yasser Arafat himself said in his biography that the Palestinians have no national identity. I, Yasser Arafat, man of destiny, will give them an identity through conflict with Israel. And Anders, isn't this part of the point, leading on from what James was talking about there, that whether you have mysticism or the creation of a myth and a legend and a story, both are techniques for being able to use force in a dictatorial way and to use force as a means for to getting to an end, as they've been doing with Gaza and with the Palestinians in over decades.
Yeah, I mean that statement in of itself, I mean, it's second-handedness on a national level, or they don't have a nation, but on a tribal level, where your values are dependent on what you do to somebody else. You know, it's very revealing. Just one more essay of one of her brilliant essays is also Attila and the Witch Doctor, where she kind of explains the interplay between the quote unquote a dictator or a dictatorial regime and its need for mystical for the witch doctor who is kind of providing the mystical reasons or justification for their actions. That's another article that is or essay that is very well worth reading. And I just wanted to say so piggybacking on what James was saying, you know, this and what you asked in the last question, the mysticism versus and dictatorship, how they go hand in hand, but also the fact that it's not based on a rational view of human nature, and on reason and rationality means that it's really so easy to nip in its bud. But it's only due to the fact that rational societies based on reason are conflicted and influenced by their own versions of mysticism and particularly altruism, as we talked about earlier, that dictatorship can arise and flourish in the first place. So back to Iran, and we just see this as the latest example. And what makes it so tragic is that, you know, once again, it seems like we're letting this slip through our fingers without taking out the regime once and for all. And yes, that may create chaos in Iran, but it will remove the threat to United States and to Israel, and then the Iranian people has to figure it out themselves what they want to do next. But the fact that this ceasefire I mean, it was so close to finish up this, and that if anything makes my blood boil, that's it.
Yeah, if I could just observe where she talks about the Attila and the Witch Doctor is in her introductory essay to her first nonfiction book for the New Intellectual.
Thank
And
you. I didn't remember where it was.
Faith and
Exactly.
Force is actually one of the very first speeches she ever gave at university following the publication of Atlas Shrugged. And so it's very interesting to note that among Rand's earliest nonfiction work, after she turned her attention from fiction to nonfiction, were Faith and Force and For the New Intellectual, where she's actually discussing the relationship between the different kinds of mystics, between the muscle mystics who are the Attilas and the mystics of spirit, the witch doctors, who always work hand in hand and need one another. It's astonishing to me that we're still talking about it. It's more trenchant and more relevant even today, but she nailed it then. But you're absolutely right. Mr. Trump says, well, we don't want to create chaos in Iran. Well, okay, so what is better? The oppression of the Iranian people, their murder, their slaughter, their disappearing into prisons where they'll never be found again, or chaos in which at least the Iranian people have some chance for something better? No, I'm not sure that when he says chaos would be worse than this horrible theocratic dictatorship that has been so aggressive throughout the region and with their terrorism across the world, is that perhaps probably temporary chaos? I'm not going to say how long that chaos might last, but this evil regime has lasted 46 years. So I would ask Mr. Trump to reconsider his words about what is preferable here, chaos or theocratic dictatorship.
Yeah, and of course, the Iranian regime knows that all they have to do just be perceived as good for 3 years, and then the next administration they can run rings around them again. Even if Trump suggests, "I'm going to bomb you if you produce more material," well, in 3 years' time, somebody else will be in charge. Somebody will be more predictable, perhaps a bit more of a career politicians, and they can do what they like they've done until now. Because we got to this point because of continuous moral defaulting from the West. I mean, they haven't created equipment and facilities out of nothing. They've been building them year after year after year, and we've been looking the other way year after year after year. So,
Yeah. And of course, stopping this too early has allowed them to crack down on the dissidents within their own country who were there before. And many of those people who were involved in the Woman Life Freedom protests back in 2022 and their family members are now being, rounded up and disappeared, or will be ultimately disappeared by the Iranian regime because of stopping this too early. Earlier you were talking about how dictatorships operate, and one of the things, let me come to you, Anders, is that they fake reality. They fake reality all the time, and we've seen some of the evidence of this in terms of how they've been showing like drones, which they claim they've taken off of people that they've captured within Iran, that are actually pictures from Ukraine fighting against Russia, for example, or they've got the equipment they found immediately after when the war first started on June the 13th. Lots of the drones and the spike missile casings that the Israelis used within that very clever technique they used of concealing drones and missiles within Iran itself. That they could prove that those were Israeli, but everything they've captured since has all been equipment that's been available on the Iranian market, and therefore looks distinctly like they're making it up, frankly, when it comes to who they've caught and what evidence they've got for catching them. I mean, Anders, your thoughts?
Yeah, no, that's what I said initially when we started out, that you can obviously not trust anything coming out of a dictatorial regime like this one, whether it's pictures of drones or other things. That's just a fact. I mean, just like we've seen. But of course, people are gullible, or people believe what they want to believe, and I mean we've seen that during the Hamas war consistently, that news organizations and individuals have ignored the fact that every number of deaths in Gaza and injured and so on and so forth comes out of the Hamas health ministry. Duh. It's and it's the same thing we see repeated here with the Iranian regime, and for that fact, coming out of any dictatorial or authoritarian regime.
Yeah, I mean the whole propaganda is clearly not to be taken as not even as a good statement. But when they say death to America, death to Israel, and when they're trying to kill the president of the United States, I mean that's quite a declaration of war, isn't it? How much clearer can somebody get? But we still ignore them. We still treat them like they're good guys, people you can deal with. It's just farcical.
And GL Wordsmith has given us a super chat. Thank you very much, GL Wordsmith, and makes the point that the US has 40,000 troops in the Middle East because of the continued chaos from Islamic fanatics. And that's absolutely the case, isn't it, James? I mean, it's the fact that there are these bases that Iran could attempt to attack is a result of the fact that too much appeasement for too long, essentially, isn't it?
Well, precisely. It is. It's well, you can't separate the issue of international altruism that we've been discussing as well. I mean, we should not be recognizing dictatorships of any kind. But the whole reason why we need to have thousands of troops in the Middle East is because of the threat from Iran. I mean, if we don't get rid of that regime, the threat doesn't go away magically. But part of it is the fact that we're willing to recognize dictatorships, willing to go out and defend these countries that we really ought not to be having any real relationship with anyway. But another part of it is international altruism. That is to say, our involvement in Iraq. I'm glad ISIS was taken out. I mean, surely they would have continued to be a problem in the area. But when we do it, as Anders says, we should do it with American interests clearly in mind. And by the way, that will be perfectly consistent with the interests of all of civilization. But look, if these these friends of Trump, who are these international peaceniks who in effect advocate isolationism, if they want those troops to leave the Middle East, let me suggest that the best way to achieve that is to take out the Iranian regime.
Yeah, for sure. And any final thoughts from you guys as we get close to the end here? And so let me come to you. I mean, basically what we're seeing now is such an opportunity for Iran to up the PR, aren't we? I mean, for example, even the fact that I heard that Iran referred to Israel as turning to, quotes, daddy, obviously quoting the line that, who was it, Mark Rutte used from NATO in relation to Trump. So constantly they're straight on the opportunity to score PR points when they really ought not to have a microphone at this point. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I agree. And going back to one of James's earlier points, that one of the hopes here is that the regime again or makes a tactical mistake, the Iranian regime, and kind of make Mr. Trump angry again, and hopefully they make a mistake that is of such a magnitude that without really hurting us, obviously, but whether that is stop closing the Strait of Hormuz or something else, that finally tips the scale towards actually taking out the regime. But again, it's a sad note that that hope depends on what the Iranian regime does and not what we do preemptively, which should be to take out the regime.
Yeah, and hopefully the next mistake that Iran makes is not to hand over the uranium if Trump puts it as a condition for any deal. That would be a good reason to bomb them again, wouldn't it? But anyway, Anders, where can people find more about you?
You can find me on Substack, andersingemarson.substack.com, and my book, Think Right or Wrong, Not Left or Right, is available on Amazon.
Cool. Thank you. James, last thought, and where can people find more about you?
I'm glad this is the last thought. There's some noise taking place outside my home that I hope isn't interfering. But I highly recommend following Anders on Substack. I can be found here, but I can also be found at Facebook, James Stevens Valliant, where I'm active almost every day answering questions. So if you have any questions or comments, please hit me up there, and I will silence this noise now.
And thank you, James. And you can also check out the Briefly Objective, the sister channel to this, for the short form material taken from many of the conversations about the key principles that have been at play during the conflict we've seen, particularly since October the 7th. So thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us. Thank you to our super chatters and to Irene, our producer today. And we'll be back tomorrow for another edition of the Daily Objective. So thank you. Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.